Welcome, Yamhill County, to Speaking Frankly. I'm your host, Howie Harkema, and our tagline is, "And how we doin'?" Today I have a candidate for City Council, Ward 1, Sal Peralta. Sal Peralta, welcome.
Thank you, Howie, for having me on.
It's great to have you back.
I appreciate it.
You were my second interview when I started doing the
Really?
show for Frank.
It's been about 3 years, hasn't
Yeah,
it?
it has been.
Good. Well, I'm glad to be back on.
Yeah. So first of all, I know that you're the interim right now on the council,
Right.
Taking the place of Kevin Jeffries. So what is your background, and how has your background prepared you for this office?
Oh, thanks for the question. Yeah, I was appointed in January of this year after the previous council president resigned due to work-related reasons. He was kind of having to travel a lot through his work, and it was, he felt it was detracting from his ability to serve on the council. So he spoke to me shortly before he decided to step aside and asked if I'd be interested. And I honestly had to give it a lot of thought, Howie, because it's a challenging position. It's a volunteer position. It's not compensated. And for someone like me who is really passionate about public policy, the problems that we deal with on City Council can be really absorbing and can kind of flow into your day-to-day life and can be pretty consuming at times. But ultimately, I felt that the background that I have in public policy with 18 years of policy experience in different state legislatures, working on some of the more challenging problems that we have as a state, makes me a pretty good fit for the City Council, and I frankly felt a calling to serve.
Awesome. And so the hours that we see at the City Council meetings are just a teeny piece of all of that.
Right. That's really the tip of the iceberg. And candidly, most of what the City Council's role in government, in our city government, is to set the policy direction for the city. Most of the heavy lifting happens at the staff level most of the time. And we're really fortunate in McMinnville that we have across every one of our departments just really top-notch people, both in leadership and in terms of the frontline workers. I mean, our city government is a really well-run organization, primarily because we have such great staff, top to bottom.
Yeah, they're awesome. I've worked with most of them.
Yeah.
So you're also the secretary of the Oregon Independent Party. What have you learned from all of that?
Well, we formed the Independent Party 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was in response to legislation that the state legislature had passed that made it harder to run for public office as an independent. Basically what they did is they doubled the number of signatures that you needed to file as a candidate, and then removed the word independent from the ballot so that people who filed wouldn't be called independents, they'd be called non-affiliated. And the reason they did that was because they had polling that showed that voters were less likely to vote for a non-affiliated candidate if they were labeled that way on the ballot than they were an independent candidate. And if you think about it, independent connotes strong, self-reliant, not subject to the direction of others, whereas non-affiliated is more loner, discontent, malcontent. And we thought it was outrageous what they had done at the time, and so we collected 30,000 signatures to form the Independent Party, and shortly after we formed it, a huge number of people started joining. The party currently has 125,000 members statewide, which is about 5% of the total number of registered voters in the state. And really what we found is that a lot of people were disaffected with the two-party system. Some people have completely disengaged. They're non-affiliated voters. They don't vote. They're not participating. They've gotten that frustrated. But our members are quite a bit more engaged than that. And what they really want is a government that focuses on problem solving and that focuses on serving the public interest rather than the private interest that finance most of our political campaigns in the state.
And I've never understood why they had it come down to two-party system anyway.
Yeah.
So 125,000 members, that's bigger than Yamhill County.
It is. It's larger than, say, Bend, which is the fourth largest city in the state. And it's interesting that as we formed the party was right at the time when the two bigger parties started becoming more and more polarized. And what has happened is that in 2009 we passed a fusion voting law that allows candidates to list multiple nominations after their name on the ballot. And then after we passed that, getting the independent party nomination became something of a desired thing for candidates, Democratic and Republican candidates who were in very contested races, because they wanted to be thought of and perceived of as independent of their party. And so we've tried to use that to leverage public interest policies over the last 10 years at the legislature, so that we can use the fact that these folks are coming to us wanting our cross-nomination, and then saying, well, that's great, but what are you going to do about the impact of PERS on local governments? What are you going to do about the fact that we haven't had decent environmental regulation on industrial polluters for 40 years? And, as a result, we've had some legislative wins, some that we'd like to get done over time, but really what I've learned is that even in this era of polarization, and in this era of two big parties fighting each other more than they are working collaboratively, if you're willing to approach people in good faith, regardless of their political ideology,
sure,
most elected officials are willing to work with you and willing to try and help problem solve, and that's really been our experience. And I feel like I've developed a reputation among most of the legislators that I work with, whether it's Democratic or Republican, that we're trying to be data-driven, fair-minded, and focused on solving the issue. And what I've learned actually as a result of this process is that our ability to solve problems as a state is strengthened when we have a bunch of different voices and different points of view working on problems. If you have, just a group of people who are like-minded folks trying to fix a problem, you're going to end up with a very specific kind of solution.
Right.
And that's true whether it's Democrats trying to solve it, or Republicans trying to solve it, or the business community, or the labor community.
Sure.
We need, or environmentalists, we need these people to come together and work out solutions that will work for all of us.
Well, bipartisan crossing the aisle seems to be the way to make that happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're also the co-organizer of the Granary Summer Flix.
Yeah, that was fun.
Let's talk about that.
So, this past year, and folks may remember, we've over the years in McMinnville had different free summer movies.
Sure.
And the first one that my wife and I had attended about 5 or 6 years ago, they actually shot on the wall of the Granary building. But since then, through the improvements on Alpine Street, and they've set up an amphitheater space there. And so my wife and I decided as a fundraiser for some of the local schools to put together a free summer Flix event where it's free to the public, and then we took sponsorships from the business community to pay for the movie, and then as a fundraiser for the kids. And it was really great. I mean, we had probably 200 people out. The first one we did, that was Coco, the animated film.
Yeah, it's a great film.
And then a week later we did Cars, another great Disney film. And next year I hope to expand it, and hopefully we'll do it in support of the McMinnville Public Schools next year.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, talk about Discovery Spring Run for a moment.
Yeah, another event that my wife and I did as a fundraiser for schools. We did that also out of the Granary district, and it's a run that we've put on for different schools over the last 3 years. I think we had 85 to 90 participants this year, and it's something that I hope that we'll be able to continue. The idea is to put together these kinds of civic events to bring people together,
sure,
raise money for the community, and just give people ways to kind of plug into to our city.
So you're organizer of Citywide Neighborhood Watch Informational Meeting.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, that was in my voters pamphlet statement. So this summer, after I'd been appointed to the city council, I was often getting phone calls from people who were concerned about crime in their neighborhood, and oftentimes it was just something suspicious. It wasn't something that was necessarily actionable by the police. It wasn't, hey, my car got broken into, or my bike got stolen, or my house got broken into. It was, I saw somebody suspicious on my street, or there's this kind of activity that I don't feel comfortable with. And after speaking to the police, I realized that really what we need is to get folks together in their own neighborhoods to kind of look after their own neighborhood, and then,
Sure.
and then when something rises to the level of needing police involvement, then you have people looking out for each other. They're maybe documenting what's happened, and they can call the police. So the point of that meeting was to just get people from all over the city, and we had pretty good participation. I think probably 30 or 40 people came at least, and the idea was to give them the information they needed to start their own neighborhood watch programs in their neighborhoods.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
So let's talk about some of the city issues and tasks that are happening at the city council level today.
Sure.
Affordable housing.
Housing affordability is one of the biggest challenges we have as a state. It's a regional problem. It's
Yes.
not just a McMinnville problem.
Right.
In the Portland metro area, we've had about 155,000 fewer units built, both across rentals and purchase homes, and so that has hugely driven up the cost of housing.
Absolutely.
And kind of overlaying that problem is the fact that Oregon is also 10th fastest growing state in terms of population in the country. So we have too little housing and too many people moving in, and it's driven up the cost of housing to a point where a lot of people can't afford it. The city, in terms of the things that we're trying to do to address it, we're trying to make it easier for people to build housing, easier for people to do, for example, accessory dwelling units, which
Sure.
is something that we passed that allows people to add additional units to their existing property. Also, we're looking at, after the election, we'll be looking at some code changes that will allow business owners to put single residential units above their business in some of the commercial zones.
Sure.
And so that's another way where we can kind of increase housing inventory. This year we have 600 affordable units, market rate affordable units coming into the pipeline, so that's going to really kind of help McMinnville in that regard. And then over the long term, we're starting the master planning process for our housing inventory and buildable lands inventory. And McMinnville's had two pretty high-profile failures over the last 30 years in trying to bring in buildable lands. So we really haven't brought in substantial buildable lands for nearly 30 years.
Okay.
And so that process is going to be really important to our city going forward. I felt that it was really important not to repeat some of the mistakes that we've made in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the groups that was probably most successful at opposing some of what the city tried to do on its last attempt to bring in lands, buildable lands, was 1,000 Friends. And so right at the very beginning of this process, I sat down with 1,000 Friends and said, you know, we need to make sure that you guys understand the constraints that we're operating under, and the city understands your constraints, and everybody getting to be a part of the conversation right from the very start, because
Right.
that's how you can find consensus.
You bet.
Yeah.
So a lot of people commute to McMinnville to work here.
Yeah.
And beyond that, there's a lot of people that are in poverty that could really use affordable housing, because there are very limited, inexpensive homes or apartments available as well.
Yeah.
How do you feel about all of that?
Well, I mean, obviously, we need to do more to expand housing across all levels. I
Right.
mean, what you're referring to in some quarters, they call that workforce housing, and really the truth is, McMinnville, the prices have become gentrified, and it's harder and harder for people who are working in service industry jobs, for example, to live in the place where they work, and that's definitely unfortunate. One of the things that I'm working with our current state representative Ron Noble on is legislation that will make it easier to build affordable housing projects in communities like ours. We have an inclusionary zoning proposal that the state had passed a couple of years ago, but the way that they set it up makes it very difficult for smaller communities like ours to take advantage of
Sure.
it. It was really designed for Portland or Eugene or these
Sure.
bigger cities. So with a couple of small tweaks, we could make that actually available to cities like ours and to other small cities around the state. So I think
Really
that-
important.
Yeah, for
really
sure.
important.
For sure.
Let's talk about community schools and educational programs. Where do you stand on where we're at and where we can be?
Well, I mean, education is a little bit outside of the purview of City Council. I mean, that all is happening at the school board level. But, you know, there is overlap in the sense that some of the constraints and challenges that we face in terms of education, we're also facing in terms of our city budgets. And the biggest problem that we have in terms of our city budget right now is that $1 out of every 5 of our payroll goes to past unreimbursed costs associated with PERS.
Right.
And unless the state lawmakers do something to address that, every jurisdiction, whether it's a school board or a city or a county, is like a salmon swimming upstream against the river. You know, when I look at, for example, our fire staff, for every 5 people that we pay to hire, we can really only hire 4.
Right.
And that's true for police, it's true for parks, it's true for library, and it's not just McMinnville, it's every other city in the state, every school district. So that's a pretty substantial challenge that we're facing that touches on schools. In terms of education, strong supporter of education, K through 12 funding overall. I think that Oregon really needs to do more to make sure that more dollars get into the classroom, and that the current workers that we have, whether they're city workers or whether they're teachers, are fairly compensated for what they're doing. And it's harder because of the constraints that we have to treat all of our employees as fairly as we'd like. So I think that is something, again, that really needs to change on a statewide level.
Well, I know you're involved in fundraising for the schools, and so that's important too, and people don't realize that they can do that.
Well, McMinnville is a really generous community, and I think part of the reason why our schools here have been so successful has been that the community has really stepped up to fund a lot of different programs. Like, for example, up until 2 or 3 years ago, the Kids on the Block program was funded with, you know, $300,000, $350,000, although it went down over time, from the mayor's ball. And that program, getting kids after school, younger kids, giving them an opportunity to engage still in learning, especially with the younger kids, has such an impact on their life's trajectory. And so, you know, the city plays an important role in funding that KOB program, and candidly, it's something that we really need to kind of redouble our efforts on. They've fallen off the last 2 or 3 years, just with the mayor's ball getting suspended a couple of years ago. So that to me is a real priority going forward.
It certainly is. So I know that you've been working with the McMinnville Police Department and Matt Scales and doing some things, so want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you at least a little bit about what the police department's doing with regard to public safety and with regard to trying to address homelessness in the community. So from a public safety standpoint, the police probably 3 or 4 years ago had a pretty significant staffing challenge that's been continuing just through as a result of the recession that we had. So this year we're pretty happy that we were able to add on 2 patrol officers to the budget. And then a couple of years ago we added mental health officer, which his role is to basically go and work with people in crisis and help the county health folks to address folks who are in crisis. And oftentimes he is a frontline person responding to you know, folks who are homeless. And I think that it's really important that we have that position, because it allows the city to engage someone in a way that doesn't necessarily track that person to the criminal justice system, but instead is intended to get them stabilized and then in a position where they can get the services they need and the help that they need. And on that point, you know, going forward, I'm really hopeful that we can make just a few tweaks here in McMinnville that could actually be a model for improving how homeless people are served at the state level. And I'll talk about that if I could. Right now in Oregon, the way that we do the homeless count, the PITS count, the annual PITS count. The front side of that form is mandated by the federal government, by HUD. And so the granularity of it only goes down to the county level. When you interview somebody, you're only getting county level data. But the state, and other states do this, has the ability on the back side of that page to add additional information to the form. And some individual agencies do that, but it's not done on a statewide level. So my view is, on the back of that form, the state should require, in addition to the county level data, getting the level of specificity to the city, so that we know that in Yamhill County, for example, if there's I'm going to just make these numbers up, but if there's 800 homeless people, chronic homeless people in Yamhill County, and I know that number's not right, so you can probably give me the correct one. But if you have a certain homeless population in Yamhill County, it's helpful from a policy standpoint to know what cities they're in, because that helps you to better able direct services to those folks. The second thing that we do as a state that I think is a little off, and other states have done this more effectively, is that agencies like YCAP or counties have what's called a frequent users of system engagement model, where they try and evaluate people who are engaging the systems regularly, and it's a pretty intensive survey that they give. But because they're nonprofits and even the county health are bound by HIPAA requirements, so they can't share their data.
I understand.
If they could share their data,
right,
it would be so much easier to direct people to services. And you'd know who the frequent users are, not just in one agency, but in all of them. And so what they did in Utah, for example, is that rather than having it be people interviewing homeless folks who were bound by HIPAA requirements, they actually had people who were essentially police that were doing the interviews.
I see.
And they weren't bound by those same requirements, so they could share the data out with multiple agencies. And so that allowed them to more efficiently start tracking people to resources that were available to them. And so I think that is a good model, and it's one that I'd like to see for McMinnville and one that I'd like to see for the state.
So McMinnville Fire Department and fire districts in keeping our highly trained employees.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
It's a huge challenge. We are at a critical staffing situation with our fire staff, and part of the reason for that is that the history of our fire department is that it's historically been a volunteer fire department that we then finance through the ambulance service. And for years, our ambulance service was a cash-generating business and cash-positive business, and then the money that was used for that was how we hired our professional firefighter staff. What's happened over the last 10 years is that the Medicaid reimbursement rates have dropped, while the costs of providing services have gone up.
Sure.
And at the same time, we've had an increase in the number of senior care facilities in our community, so we're getting more calls from those kinds of facilities that are Medicaid related, and so that has put a significant crunch on both our staffing levels and our ability to just fund fire services.
Sure.
So what the city did this past, well, actually I think we voted on it less than a month ago, was we added a senior facilities fee and then a surcharge for when people make calls that are non-emergency calls for the purpose of providing, basically using our emergency services to provide care in non-emergency settings. And so that will significantly bolster our city budget. We need to do more in order to hit the staffing levels that we need to get to. But the program that I just mentioned is a really innovative program. I mean, it's something that McMinnville is pioneering in the state of Oregon that I believe other cities are going to follow suit. Bend, Kaiser have already contacted us. And part of the reason why I think the McMinnville Professional Firefighters Association supported me in this race is that not only can I help on the policy side in McMinnville, but we can also help address this problem in other communities that are affected by this.
Sure.
And I'm really looking forward to that part of it. And it's appropriate to my role because I also sit on the Regional Council of Governments. I'm McMinnville's board representative on that body. So helping other communities is sort of part of the job description that I have on our council.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Sure.
So let's talk about city infrastructure and what's happening with our public works and such.
Sure. Well, the biggest thing to happen with our infrastructure in recent years is a couple of years ago, the voters overwhelmingly passed a bond measure to cover new construction or road improvements and sidewalk improvements in the downtown core. Those are happening. We made a significant investment to improvements on the Alpine Avenue area, 5th Street. all the way down to,
Right.
so that you have basically a much better through street on Fifth. The Hill Road project is nearing completion. We have 3 new roundabouts on Hill Road
Yeah.
that should make car traffic actually flow a lot smoother. I really like the roundabouts. So that's happening. The next big project that we're going to see once we get the Hill Road piece done is Old Sheridan Road. The bridge coming to Old Sheridan where it intersects
Right.
with the 18 is going to get improved. That there's going to be a turn signal added there, so there's going to be a big improvement there. And then
Yeah, that's a terrible corner.
Oh, it is. It takes forever to get out of there. So that's happening in terms of what the city's doing. And then the other piece that's happening in terms of infrastructure that people will be interested in is that the 3-mile lane bridge is slated for replacement. So in the next year, ODOT is going to be coming in, building a temporary bridge
Right.
right next to the existing bridge, demolishing the existing bridge, and then building a new bridge with much better pedestrian and bike access than we currently have, and a safer bridge, something they'll be able to kind of
Well, I know
withstand
last
the right.
Sunday they had it closed from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Yep.
so they could do something.
The surveying.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
happening.
We all knew it was coming.
Well,
I'll be glad when the temporary's up.
yeah, I'll be glad when that project is complete.
Oh, I bet.
be a big improvement.
Quickly, let's talk about McMinnville taxpayers subsidizing the cost of services outside of McMinnville.
Yeah, so that relates to fire safety. You know, again, it relates to the Medicaid reimbursement rates.
Right.
So what is true of senior care facilities in McMinnville is also true outside of
Sure.
McMinnville, and so we have been, you know, 10 years ago when we set up the rural fire district and the current system of districting, we were generating revenue, positive revenue
Right.
from the rural fire district, and now we're losing about $300,000
Oh, my
a year
goodness.
on emergency services calls. So when we lose money on those calls, that money comes out of our general fund.
Sure.
And so it's not fair to our taxpayers, it's not fair to city taxpayers, whether it's subsidizing calls outside of the city
Sure.
or subsidizing a multi-state for-profit corporation's cost of doing business
Sure.
in the city. You know,
Right.
taxpayers should not be
Right.
having to pay those costs. So that's a priority for me as part of addressing the staffing issue, is ensuring that we're actually getting, you know, the service that we're providing is being fully compensated.
Well, I know that we've talked a little bit about the PERS system, but let's talk about what it does to our city budget.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I mentioned, the impact of PERS on the city budget is significant. It's $1 out of every 5 that we spend on payroll, and it's going to increase. And most of those costs are tied to unreimbursed expenses from retirees who actually, you know, retired pre-2002.
Sure.
So they're older folks who are in the system. But back at that time, they were not setting aside enough money to solidify the system in the event of a downturn, and instead we're paying all of that money out to retirees as a benefit. And and that's fine as long as the market's doing well and the returns are exceeding what we're supposed to pay out. That works great. But as soon as you have a downturn, and then that money has to come out from somewhere, and it
Sure.
comes out of our general fund. And so that's coming out of our property taxes, and it's part of the reason why we have so many staffing challenges at the city. And I also feel like it's not fair to current employees that whether it's at the school district or at the city, so many people are not going to get the salary that they should, they're
Right.
not getting the benefits that they should, and there's too few of them. We need more teachers, we need more workers, and we can't afford to hire them unless some changes are made. And I don't want to be critical of people who are, you know, the PERS issue is so charged,
Yes,
so
it is.
highly charged. And when I watch the commercials about it,
Oh.
I find them to be so false, because the commercials sort of imply that everybody who's receiving these benefits are getting rich off of them.
Right.
And that's just not the case.
No.
Even people who are earning above 100% of their final salary as a retirement benefit, which I think most people agree is probably not how retirement systems
Right.
should be set up. The average monthly income of those folks is like, you know, $3,700, $3,800 a month. It's not, I mean, that's a very generous retirement, but it's not like people are getting incredibly rich
No.
off of that. It's that the system was set up for 50 to 60%, retirement rate based on your salary. And when you have people earning 100 or 110%, even if it's not huge wages, it really has an impact on the system when you multiply it out by 20,000 people.
So as us baby boomers have retired or are retiring, that's going to be an important factor to look toward.
Well, and in general, I mean, it's not just PERS, but generally speaking, the baby boom generation had, generally had better wages than the younger people coming up now. They had less expensive education opportunities than the younger people had now. And I just think that we should be directing our policy towards helping the next generation get their leg up.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've kind of gotten away from that a little bit as a country. And maybe it doesn't relate directly to City Council, but it does speak to my philosophy of governing, that we have a moral obligation to the next generation to pass on a better world than we were handed on by our parents. We have a moral obligation to try and do what we can to protect the weakest among us. And I feel like our political process has gotten away from that. We've gotten to the point where our political process treats the powerful like they're royalty, and is not really doing well by the rest of us far too often. And we need more people who feel that way to step forward into public service and to run. And I think that's something people can do at the city level. It's almost impossible at higher levels because there's so much money involved.
Right. Thank you so much for being on today, Sal.
I appreciate it.
And be sure and get out and get your ballots in the mail or into the drop box, since the mail probably won't get there anymore. So thank you very much for watching today, and be sure and get out and vote.